Welcome back everybody. In this episode we're redoing the roof sealant of our Jayco Swan Camper trailer. It's a bit of a fiddly job, but it's something you can do at home, and it's really good security to make sure your roof of your caravan, camper trailer or RV is weather tight. You don't need many tools, you just got to get in there, get it done, and we'll show you how. Now you don't need much to get this job done, but the first thing you need to do is select what sealant you're going to use, and there's a few different options that you need to explore. Through your research you'll find that a lot of people use polyurethane. So you have the Jayco products, which are very popular. This is a 291 and there's also a 221. The primary difference between the 221 and the 291 is that the 291 is a marine grade. So in my view, you'd use the 291 over the 221 as that provides a little bit of added protection, given that the roof of the caravan, camper trailer or RV that you're sealing is more exposed to the weather. However, a lot will notice that caravan repair centres sell and use neutral cure silicone such as this Bostik V4. It's extremely popular. Now the main advantage I see with neutral cure silicone, and remember you need to use a neutral cure, you don't want to use an acetic cure that you would typically find in a bathroom, is that it's flexible and you can reapply a number of times over the top of itself. The main downfall with polyurethane, and why I'd be extremely cautious if you're refinishing or resealing a caravan or RV or something along those lines, is that the polyurethane does not like sticking to old silicone. And so for this very reason, I'd prefer to use the Bostik V4 in that it's less likely to fail down the track due to the substrate that's lying underneath it. And while you can try as much as you want to get all the sealant out, you'll always find there will be some residue left over. The polyurethanes I find do get a little bit hard over time and can crack and pull away. And that's something you really don't want with a roof seal over a caravan. So the choice really is up to you, and the methodology isn't all that different. I will be using a neutral cure silicone just because I trust it a little bit more, and it's something that I work with day in, day out. Well, thanks for that, B2. Now, what other tools do you need for the job? Not much really. And if you don't have them, I'll put a full list in the description below so you can go out and get them yourself. Firstly, you want a sharp Stanley knife. It's very important to make sure you get around and cut out as much material as you can. Secondly, I find these flat blade holders really handy. This is a silicone one you can get from Bunnings, and again, I'll put that in the description below. Get yourself one of these, they are fantastic. Now, one other little tool that you probably haven't thought of that we use in bathrooms all the time to remove silicone is one of these fibro cutters. This is a Trojan brand, and again, it's really good for just ripping through and getting the material out that you might be able to get with a knife or they get stuck underneath. Now, the plastic scrapers and removers such as this might be handy as well. I personally don't use them, but I'm going to give it a go to see how it turns out, and I'll let you know. And then once you've got all the silicone out, you want to run over with some isopropyl to clean out the joint, ready to put the new silicone in. Now, when it comes to finishing the silicone off, you probably do want to tape it because you'll have a fairly wide joint because you want to make sure you get as much silicone or sealant in there as possible. Now, if your roof surface has a bit of a rough texture to it, like we have on our Jayco Swan here, Bostik makes a rough surface tape. This is actually really good for sticking to those awkward or difficult surfaces where you can't get a really good bond. And to help you finish off the silicone, you can get these applicators which make your life a lot easier. They have a lot of different profiles on them. I typically only use the one with the rounded edges, but the bevel might work for you as well. It just makes it a lot cleaner and neater to get the silicone all finished off. You then give it a quick spray with some soapy water and finish it all off. And while people are always worried about making a mess with silicone, have some paper towel on handy, I rip it up into squares and you use that to wipe off your applicator, off your fingers, and keep yourself all nice and tidy. And I nearly forgot, you also need a caulking gun, whether it be a manual one like this, or a powered unit such as this ryobi unit we've got here. One thing to note is wind the speed right down so it's super duper slow, and then you can gradually increase, because these will put out a fair bit of fluid and burn a tube really, really fast. So my one piece of advice is run these as slow as you can, so you're not putting too much material down and wasting it when you wipe it back off. You also want to cut the tip at 45 degrees to make the application a lot nicer and neater. So jumping up onto the top of the van, it's a good idea to give it a wash to get rid of any residue and dirt off the top of it. Make sure you do it a few days in advance, because you don't want any water sitting underneath any of the joints, as the moisture underneath could cause the silicone to fail. If your van is stored outside and it's been quite wet, I think it's a good idea to strip the silicone out in good weather, let it breathe so any moisture can evaporate back out of the joints, and then go around and silicone it once it's all nice and dry. Now, stripping the old sealant out is a bit of a fiddly job, but as with all projects, preparation is key. So you want to strip as much of this out as you can so that it's all ready to put the new silicone in afterwards. So it's a simple case of getting a sharp knife, and then you want to run down one side. Make a few passes if you need to. You don't want to push all the way through the roof material that you're trying to protect. And then come from the bottom side and slide through. And then you'll start seeing it peeling off like this. If you've got silicone, you might be lucky enough that you can sort of run through and peel it all up in one go. If it's this old mastic, I find it's quite tacky underneath and it's a little bit hard to sort of get out. But that's where your other tools come in handy. The flat blade scraper is really good for running along the horizontal surface. So you can either come into the side to the extrusion itself, or sometimes, it depends on the texture of the roof, I find you can slide it along the extrusion, which helps strip out the sealant on the horizontal roof surface. The fibro cutter, on the other hand, has these sharp prongs on both sides, and what it does, it allows you to run through the internal part of the joint to strip out any material that might be left. So I suggest you just play around with a few tools to find what works best in your instance to strip this sealant out. Some people have also suggested you could use a stiff brush to try to get any of the remaining material off as well. And then you also have your silicone removal dissolvents. I would be really careful with a finished roof that you're not stripping any of the finishing materials off, whether or not it's a powder coat, the paint, or anything like that. It's much better to use sharp tools, strip out as much of the material as you can, and then go back over with the isopropyl to not only clean the joint out and sterilize it, but that will also help remove any of the final little bits of sealant as well. Now, everyone knows these corner caps on the Jayco wind-up camper trailers are extremely vulnerable to water ingress. So you want to get as much silicone out of this internal corner as you possibly can. You also want to strip the silicone out of the seam where it joins onto the end extrusion and the seam where it joins onto the side extrusion, and run all the way down to make sure you've sealed it up as much as you possibly can. And the good news is that's the hard part done. Stripping the sealant out of these textured roofs can be really hard. You would have seen I went over a number of times with a flat blade, trying to work out as much of the sealant as I possibly could. The texture just makes it really difficult. Once you get all the sealant out, you'll notice I just quickly swept it up and blew off any dust that was left over. And then it's a case of just running over with some isopropyl cleaning alcohol. Now the role of this isopropyl is to clean the joint out, and it will also sterilize in behind the joint as well. The isopropyl will also help remove any leftover residue, but it won't do that much. So don't rely on the isopropyl for that. You want to get off any loose or flaking sealant or material in the area where you're planning to put the new sealant in, because if there are little loose pieces around everywhere, that will be a likely failure point. If you're really diligent on these Jayco camper trailers, you would take off the bag awnings. There's just simply a screw at either end and they'll slide out, and then you can strip and reseal the silicone underneath all the way down to the end of the roof caps as well. I'll probably do that at a later date because this job in itself is actually quite large and we're on a bit of a time frame here. So I'll simply spray around the isopropyl now. Give it a good wipe down with a microfiber cloth. And if it is still slightly damp or there's a bit of isopropyl residue, don't worry too much because it'll have time to evaporate off by the time you work your way back around again. And now we're on to masking. Now I don't typically tape joints up, and I suspect that most caravan manufacturers don't either, but you can see here on the Jayco that there's actually a bit of a line that runs down through here, and it looks like when they originally sealed this roof that they might have taped it up. So I'm just going to follow that line where it's whiter and then the roof has yellowed off a bit on the other side. Not that the sealant extended that far, so I'm a little bit bemused about that, but we'll use that as a bit of a guide to put our tape down, and that'll give a good thickness for the sealant to go in, that we can wipe it off and get it all nice and smooth and blend it out into the roof. So it's just a simple case of getting the tape, put it down at one end, run it through so it's tight to the other end, and then just pat it down. And now it's time to silicone. You'll notice I've just run the tape around the bottom side because that's what we want to profile off to. You don't really need to worry about the top side because as you finish it off, it's pretty easy and neat to do. Now most people will freak out about the silicone side of it, but it's really quite easy. What you want to do is just manage the application of the silicone from the gun into the joint that you're trying to do. So if you're using a battery powered one, you're going to wind that down and run the gun at the speed that it dispenses at, so you're not putting too much silicone out. I find with this neutral cure silicone, I'm probably putting a little bit too much on still, but I want to make sure I've got enough in there so it finishes flush with the top edge of this side profile extrusion, so then it tapers down to the roof. And that'll give a really nice gentle profile to make sure that the water will shed off the roof in those big downpours that you have. Now with the silicone applicators, I've decided to use this one, which is the right angle square edge. It's got this funny little profile on it, but that will actually work well to run along this bevel just to smooth it all off. And then of course you want to tear up your squares of paper towel, have them sitting off to the side so that you can wipe your applicators down and keep them all nice and clean, and also wipe down the end of the nozzle because it will ooze out from time to time. So behind the scenes, I've started running my way down the roof here. I'm into the corner. You want to put all the silicone in around the corner, down around all the profiles, so that when you put your soapy water, or in my case, I've got some finishing fluid that I use as part of the business, so that the finishing fluid or the soapy water will be sprayed over the whole entire lot. The last thing you want to do is come to a point, spray some silicone release, and that will mean that if you put any silicone in that spot, it won't bond to the surface you're on. So you want to make sure you run it all the way around, and then when you're spraying so you can smooth it over the top, you want to stop it short of where you've already put the silicone in by about 1 inch or 2 centimeters, just so that you can lap on your next run of silicone and keep working your way around the roof. So we'll put the silicone into this corner now, finish it all off and see how it looks. You don't need to rush this. You just want to put a nice even line of silicone all the way around. I tend to put in a little bit more, even though you waste it. And you will notice that you'll move off the edge every now and again. I do try to just touch that up just a little bit if it's too far off, because the last thing you want is any finishing fluid getting down the side there, or an air pocket opening up, even though you're going to profile it off when you're finished. And it's really hard to do it smoothly because of this rough profile of the roof. So put a little bit of extra material into the corner so that you can smooth it all out and get a nice gentle profile down from the top of the roof cap onto the roof itself. Now I'm just going to run a small amount of silicone into the edge profile of the roof cap on the side and on the rear in our case. And then we'll come through and smooth it all out. Now that you've got the silicone into all these joints in the corner, you want to do a very light spray of your soapy water or finishing fluid so that you can finish off the top of the silicone. So it's a case of just doing a very light spray. Then we're going to get this right-angled finishing piece. Give it a quick spray as well. And then from where you finished last time, you just continue through. And then we'll go from the opposite end back to the corner. So for the end cap edges, you just run a bead of silicone down through here after you've cleaned it out. And then I use the second smallest radius to run back down, smooth it out. So we put a bit of finishing fluid on it, run it down so it's nice and neat. And then you can just smooth it with your finger. And now that we've got our roughing in done, I'll just give it another light spray just so you got a little bit of fluid on top of the silicone, and then finish it off with your finger. And I'll bring my finger in and just run it along the edge of the tape so that my finger's running along the top of the aluminium profile. And then we just shape the corner, pull off any excess. I'll do a close-up, but you want to shape it into the profile to make sure there's no holes or leaks in this corner. And make sure the silicone overlaps and joins into where we're running it down the ends of the roof caps as well. The smoother you can finish all your joints, the less dirt you'll have in there and the better condition it will remain in over the lifespan of the silicone or the sealant itself. So if you have it all finished rough, it's going to get dirt in it, that's going to break it down and the water can't shed off it properly. Smooth it all out, it takes 2 seconds and it will last a lot longer. And now we'll just pull the tape up And then just do a final run around just to feather it out and make sure you haven't got any lips onto the roof. Now when I did the end cap on the other side, I did try to get some sealant into the sail track gap. It just made a mess. You could potentially get it in there and then try to finish it with a cotton bud or something like that you can get in through the hole, or some people use paddle pop sticks, but I would be more inclined to leave it sealed up, treat the outside areas that you can get to really easily and sealed off all nice and smooth so that it looks presentable and it will stand the test of time. So now I'm just going to continue around the rest of the roof and I'll show you how it turned out at the end. And that's the roof seal essentially done. It's a little bit of a fiddly job, but it's not impossible to do, and it's very easy to make it all neat and tidy. Particularly using the Bostik V4 silicone. It's a lot more malleable than say the Ardex SE range that I'm used to using. It's a little bit more forgiving if you let it sit for a while, in that it doesn't skin over as fast as the Acetic QR silicones. So you've got a little bit more time to work it if you need to make a little correction or smooth it out a little bit more, and particularly to join in with a bit that you've already done. And now for the plastic silicone removal tool. What do I think about that? Well, look, to be honest, I'm 50-50 on it. It really didn't do much with the silicone we've got. I might try it in a shower to see how it goes, but to be honest, I'm a big fan of using nice sharp blades and doing it properly like that. I did find that this edge was quite good to try to get some of that mastic up off the rough surface in between using the blade. One thing to note when using a flat blade to scrape the silicone off, when it's a fresh blade, it can tend to grab a little bit. So you've just got to play around with it. You almost have to work it in a little bit so you can get a nice smooth cut with it, so you can scrape out the silicone as you go. But it's not that hard. Did you need to use tape? Probably not. To be honest, I don't think the tape made a huge difference. But for someone that's not that confident in using silicone, the tape is really, really good in that you can just finish it off, pull it back and then feather it out if you need to. Just make sure that there's not a real thick lip on that tape edge, so that when you pull the tape up, it's a matter of just running your finger over to smooth it all out. So that's essentially it. I hope you enjoyed it and it helps you out. Put a few comments below, like the video, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. We've got a lot more stuff coming up. I'm starting to get onto a roll now. I'm freeing up a little bit of time. It is 1 o'clock in the morning and I do have to go to work tomorrow, so I'm trying to pump these things out as quick as I can. So there's plenty more content coming along, but I better get going now. So thanks for watching. Get out there, stay safe and have fun. Catch you next time.